Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by on a really dull and miserable day. It's not an ideal day for filming, but welcome to probably what will be the final part of the before and after set. And I've had quite a few people have put requests in to see how things are doing specifically, so I'll try and include everything that's been requested. And if I miss anything, sorry. But there's only so much I can do. I just thought we'd have a last look at that Vanda flower because it is going now. It is starting to go. The plant itself's doing well, in the middle of watering, so I'm not going to get that down as such. The one next to it is the species that had the wonderful flowers for the first time. 3 spikes on that. And the little kiki's coming on nicely, which I'm hoping is going to fill in that gap at the bottom where a lot of the leaves died off. They didn't die off in my possession. And a quick look at this one. The spike is coming on really well on that. It's pushing up at quite a rate of knots. I don't know how many blooms it will have, but given the size of them, I'll suggest 4 or 5, but we'll see. But the plant itself has come on leaps and bounds. It's grown a lovely amount of top growth, and it's pushed out a new root system. Bearing in mind when I got it, the root system it had was pretty lousy. That's what comes of sinking it in a pot and keeping it soaking wet. That's not how you grow Vandas. Okay, I'm not going to do culture on Vandas because basically my culture for Vandas is hanging them up in the best light I've got, and when it's warm weather I dunk them in a bucket in the morning, leave them to soak for a while with some reasonable feed in their growing season, and then I hang them back up again. So it's not exactly culture, but that's what I do, and they seem to do okay. You know, all of my Vandas that are of the appropriate size have bloomed this year for the first time, so brilliant. We'll have a look at 2 specifically. This one down here was the one my daughter got me, and that's pushing up a nice spike. That's pushed out quite a few new roots since I got it. It's a good root system, and there's still a few ones on there I could trim off that are obviously dead just to tidy it, but that's probably next year's job now. It's pushed out quite a few new leaves, and it had 2 spikes when I got it. It pushed up 2 more after that, and now it's pushing up another one. That will be its last one, I would imagine, for this year, because my Vandas are slowing down quite dramatically now. And this one up here, bang me head on it, again before the blooms go over. It's been out a nice long time, and it's its first time blooming. And this year it's pushed out a good root system, so it's a happy plant, and the top growth is really good. And if I bang my head on that flipping bulbophyllum once more, there's going to be trouble. There'll be language. But yeah, the new leaves on this are a good size, you know, larger than the previous leaves, so it's doing well. Okay, we'll go back and have a look at some of those back in May. I didn't have all of them, but we'll have a quick look back in May. So the orange one back in May, I was just discussing the sadness of losing the blooms, first Vanda blooms I've ever had, but down in there was a bud. There was also a second bud on the other side, didn't really show up on film. So those 2 spikes, when they grew on, were the first 2 blooms on a Vanda that I had ever grown myself, and I was well pleased. I mean, that was a good plant when my daughter got it. So that's the orangey one. And this one with the bright pink flowers, I was having trouble with the name at the time. You can probably see why. But you know, I was basically discussing that I thought this plant might still be a bit too young to actually bloom. It was growing some really good leaves. It had a little bit of a suntan near the top, so it was obviously getting enough light, but I was still dubious as to whether that was blooming size or not. Well, as we now know, it was, although it was later in the year by the time it got round to it. And unceremoniously getting dunked in the bucket, as we do. Okay, so there we go, a quick look at the Vandas. As I said, Roger's culture for Vandas is hang them high, as much light as possible, and feed and water well in their growing season. And by that I mean they get soaked. I don't believe I would get anywhere near enough hydration into those plants if I only sprayed those roots. And I can't think of any other way of getting a suitable amount of water into the plant, apart from allowing them to soak and take in as much as they possibly need. So that's what I do. Now the frequency is going to slow up now as we get into the short day lengths, the lower temperatures. The Vandas are going to slow down. They will come to an almost stop, but it's not an absolute stop. They're not dormant, they're just growing very, very slowly. And as a consequence, they won't get watered every day. I'm already down to every other day, and as we head towards December, January, February, I might even go to every third day, but the watering programme will still stay the same. Okay, so let's quick look at the Vandas. This is Decariana, and this one's growing well for me. It's pushed out a good root system, some round the back, it's attaching well, and when I actually got it, it just looked like one plant when in fact it was two plants, and they're both pushing on quite nicely. They grow leaves. So far no blooms. This one has not bloomed for me, but again with the wavy edges to the leaves, it's quite an attractive plant in its own right. So I like that one. Let's go back and see what size that was earlier in the year. So back in May we had a lot less leaves, probably not long been mounted. Root system was just sort of getting going. I was pleased with the how much progress it had made at that time. So it was coming on well, newly mounted. Okay, so there we go then. That's another Orangus. This is Mr. Sidii, I think it's actually pronounced. Mr. Sidii, yeah, two eyes on the end. And again, this has pushed out a side growth, not two separate plants. So yeah, it's a branching type plant. Again, it's got quite a nice root system. Didn't get blatted with the rain mix. It took no notice of it, quite honestly. So some plants were okay. So growing new leaves again. Let's go back and have a quick look at that one then. So a lot less leaves in those days, and it still had a reasonable root system, but that little side growth was quite young then. So yeah, I mean it was a nice plant back in May. I was well pleased with it then, but it has done rather well during this year. So back again. So there we go, that's Mr. Sidii, another Orangus. Similar size to the previous one. Again, it has this trait of wavy edges to the leaves, so it's quite an attractive plant. This is fastuosa. Fastuosa, yes, not O. This is pushing out a nice new root there. Has nice orange tips to its new roots, and it's got something which you can see near the base growing. Now that could be a little branch plant. Orangus do that quite often. It could be a spike. Difficult to tell at this stage, so we'll give it some time. But I've had several of these and not been successful. This is the only one. I've had 3 in here at one point. One was my daughter's, and this is the only one that's doing reasonably well. So I can't say that I was keeping them wrong, just that the other 2 weren't good plants, and this one's better, because they've all lived in the same place and had the same treatment. So as this one's doing okay, I don't propose to change anything. So let's go back and see how that one was earlier in the year. Okay, so back in May we can see it only had 3 mature leaves and it was just growing a new one. So it's actually progressed quite well during the year. I'm quite pleased with that, bearing in mind I lost the other 2 of the 3 that I had. Yeah, so that's done pretty good. So there we go then, that was fastuosa. That's the 3 little Orangus, nice little group of plants. All slightly different, similar blooms though. I mean, if you go in for Orangus, you can get ones with creamy tinges, ones with fawny browny tinges, ones with pink tinges. But the basic flower shape doesn't change that much. The size does, but the shape doesn't. Fundamentally pale coloured, almost white or white coloured bloom, pollinated by night flying moths, therefore does not need bright colours. It just needs to show up in the dark, and to attract its pollinators it has very pale coloured blooms and a lovely long spur out of the back to various lengths depending on the plant, and the moths actually get their nectar from the base of that spur. So basically highly fragrant at night to attract the moths, and the pale colour allows them to home in on the blooms. So yeah, evolved down a different route, all from either mainland Africa and or Madagascar. Some are unique to Madagascar. Okay, so that's Arengis. Okay, this is my little set of Masdevallias. The number of Masdevallias has gone down. Several of them are out under the hedge. I don't have a good environment for Masdevallias, so the ones that are doing well I think always will. Those that just weren't going to make it and struggled for sometimes as much as into their second year, I've just got rid of them. They take up space and they're not going to grow. However, these are. I don't know what I can do about the before and after on these. It depends what I had back in May and what I filmed. But given that I filmed all the plants I had, I'm not going to go over each individual one. I'm just going to show that in my environment, some Masdevallias, especially that one up at the back, that Snowbird, can do well. And these are coming on nicely. And now that the temperatures have dropped down, these will grow much better for the next 3 or even 4, maybe even 5 months, which means when we get back into the heat, they'll be the old butcher's dogs, because they should be fit as a fiddle and it shouldn't affect them so badly. But anyway, these have made it through the summer and they're coming on quite nicely. As I said, most of them are just hybrids. They have no ID, and consequently trying to find the before in May is damn near impossible. But I know I'll be able to find Snowbird. That has pushed up so much new growth recently. It's doing really well, but not a sign of a bloom yet. I'm hoping that with all those new growths, when it does bloom, it'll have a lot all at once, because they are stunning blooms. Okay, let's go and see what we can find in May. Well, I only managed to find Snowbird definitely. The others are difficult to identify because they've changed and some have been thrown out. But I was surprised. This plant was quite a bit smaller back in May. It's done really well this year. And without this sort of before and after thing, I wouldn't have known that, let alone anybody else. I mean, it's a good plant in May and it was pushing up new growths, and I was well pleased with it. My best Masdevallia. Okay, so that's them watered and all tucked back in their little hidey hole. On the floor, coolest place, they've got a fan directly near them. You can see the leaves are constantly moving. Good airflow is important for Masdevallias and Miltoniopsis, so that fan is pretty damn important. It does a good job for that little set. Those are all cool growers. They don't like heat. Okay, that's that little set. Okay, somebody asked to see my 2 Psychopsis. I believe I may have had 3 in May, but one was a rescue plant, and some rescues don't actually work, and that one didn't. We'll find out when we go back. I've almost got to hang my head in shame, because this one got neglected and it got a fungal infection on the leaves, and because it was tucked away at the back and I kept looking at the flowers, that one's just going over now, I forgot to keep my eye on the plant and it's damaged the leaves, but luckily it's pushed up a nice strong new growth. That leaf is good, and hopefully that new growth will push out its own good root system, which will help support the plant. I may even get another spike off of that one. We'll have to wait and see. This is a better plant. Oh sorry, that's Psychopsis. That's papilio variation alba, so that's like the species but the alba form. This one, there's a word missing on the tag. It's either Mendenhall Hildos or Hildos Mendenhall. I'll have to look that up sometime. The really old leaves on this are starting to fade. Those are the oldest bulbs basically. The leaves on the newer bulbs aren't too bad. They're not too bad, and I do have a new growth coming on this one. Now they say these don't like repotting, and some say they don't care and they're fine as long as you get it at the right time. Well, I think I got it at the wrong time. I think these are the type that grow their new growth, and the new roots for that growth don't start until it's quite mature. So I picked the wrong time by actually picking the point at which the new growth was coming out. You live and learn. So we'll have a quick look back at those in May. This one's still got its 2 flower spikes. They're not actually in bloom at the moment. but the little bit of green is showing, so we should get some more blooms soon. Okay, we'll go back and have a quick look in May. So that alba one was a blinking good plant back in May. What did I do to it? What a shame. Still, never mind. The other one wasn't a bad plant either. That one still is, but you can see the oldest leaf I was discussing, the older leaves, it was starting to go then. So obviously as the season's gone on, it's just got worse. At the time in May, I was having a discussion about the fact that this didn't really get repotted, it got potted on. Because when I took it out of its pot, it was a solid mass of what looked like good roots. So I teased a few out and put it in a bigger pot with some new media around the outside, which may not have been the best of ideas on reflection. So that's my two Psychopsis. Now these are warm growing, so strictly speaking these are going to suffer a bit in the winter, and as they're going into the winter in the not of best of health, let's just hope they come out the other end. These are Phalaenopsis type heat. They shouldn't chill, they shouldn't get cold. They are warm growing plants, and obviously in the winter in here the nights do go down to sort of 14, 15 on the cooler nights, but hopefully that's enough to just keep them going through the winter. We'll see what happens when they come out the other end in the spring. Right, this is Dendrobium harveyanum, star performer this one. It hasn't grown a lot of new canes this year. There's one here that's still actively growing, and there's my little Kiki that's coming on nicely, pushing out its own little root system. And you can stay there for a bit longer, you're not ready yet. And this new cane as well. So only two new canes. This one has finished growing, that's its terminal leaf. But that one's still growing. So this doesn't come into a rest category yet. So back in May, that's a shame, it wasn't actually in bloom. It was about to be, and it had been, but it wasn't at the time. Never mind, you got a picture there. Yeah, I was sort of generally looking at the plant. There were no sign of any new growths at this point, but you know, there was still plenty of the season. That spike was coming on. For some reason the end of that spike blasted, but nonetheless the buds were about to open. And I've been very pleased with that plant. It was a star performer. It had been in bloom for ages. So that's Dendrobium harveyanum, back in his spot where he lives. Nice bright light. It's not actually up in the roof, but that gets more sun than some of the places in the roof because it's literally facing that southern side. So does well there. No plans on moving it. Desperately needs a repot, but that's going to have to wait till the spring, and it will probably have to be repotted with spikes on it. That's just how it goes. If it's going to spike for 6 months of the year, you know, you've got to choose your spot. So that's Dendrobium harveyanum. Does well for me, that one. Very, very pleased with that plant. So here's some of my recovery cattleyas. I'm not going to go back and get all of them in May, but I will go back and have a look at this little mouthful. This is an SLC. It's Kagaribi Dawn Red Star, and it was awarded in Japan. So back in May I was discussing that this was the runner-up in the Miss Ugly Plant competition 2016. We just had a previous look at the winner. Yeah, it wasn't a good looking plant, but look at those blooms. That's why I have to keep this plant. They really don't show up as good on the camera as they are in real life. I had a lot of scale on this, but it did have a new growth, just being pointed out there. There wasn't much sign of new roots in those back in May, but yeah, it was a tatty plant, but I just had to keep it, you know, because of those blooms. I had to give it a go. So there we go, that's a quick look at one of my recovering cattleyas. That's where they all live. We never get to see them because this shelf's normally full. Well, it's being watered at the moment, so it's the only time I can ever get at those. Because they're recovered, they don't get watered, they just get their surface sprayed. I'm reluctant to get the base of recovering cattleyas wet. It seems to cause more problems than it's worth. But that's where they live, and that has to be threaded down in amongst them and the other pots put around it. It's just so big. Oh, but I love it. That's going to be a mass of blooms next year, I'm determined. So that's another Cattleya. Okay, it's another Cattleya. This is Jarac Summer, all the way from French France. And that's the latest growth up the back there. And hang on, let me just hold it. It's getting quite a big plant. I grew this from a seedling. So basically 1, 2, 3, I think 3 of those growths are mine. This is the one that loves to put its roots around the back. Yeah, it's well attached to its mount. But if we do the light trick, yep, we got buds. That'll be a first time blooming. And those flowers, if the picture's anything to go by, should be quite something. But I haven't got a picture simply because it hasn't bloomed for me before. But we'll go back and see what sort of size that was in the earlier part of the year. So back in May I was discussing the fact that because I'd bought this from a seedling, the condition of the leaves is pretty good because they're mine and I haven't had to buy them in all bashed around. It was pushing out some nice new roots. Yeah, I was quite pleased with the growth on this. You know, most of that's mine. And I was very pleased at that lovely new growth pushing out along with its roots. Very, very pleased with that. So, it was coming along nicely. Nice Cattleya. So that's Cattleya Jarac Summer. And I've got to keep my eye on that because that's where it lives, right up near the roof. And as you can see, the latest growth with the sheath on it, that sheath is only a couple of inches from the roof. So when those buds do push out and they start growing at a better rate, which Cattleyas tend to put a spurt on once they break free of the sheath, I'll have to go very careful with that or the buds are going to touch the roof and that'll either bend them or if there's any moisture up there it could even rot them. So I've got to keep my eye on that one. I'm determined not to lose those blooms. They're going to be quite something. A surprise for later in the year. Okay, I was asked for an update on the McBean's Odontoglossums. This one is the, well, it's now Oncidium alexandrae, but once upon a time it was Odontoglossum crispum. And that's its latest growth on the end there. It's sort of starting to mature, nowhere near as big as the previous one yet, but give it time. And then this one is the Golden Rialto. So back in May, on the Odontoglossum crispum, you could see there was a new growth. That's the one that's maturing quite well now. And I hadn't long had these. They'd both come from McBean's, and they were my first real old-fashioned ones. This was the other one, Golden Rialto, and there was a bit of sad news and a bit of good news on this one. On that latest mature bulb, down in there was a flower spike that had keeled over, which wasn't so good, you know, but the other side was a flower spike that hadn't keeled over, and that one did eventually flower for me. So that's as they were back in May. So there we go, that's those two. Back where they live, they get filtered light because of the plants in front of them, and they live on the floor, coolest place I've got. And in the summer they get the inlet fan blasting on them, but not this time of year. We don't want that sort of cold air coming in here, do we? So that's where they live. Cool growers, don't like to dry out, and don't like bright light. So providing you can provide all that, you should be able to grow the old-fashioned Odontoglossums. I'm hoping to have great things from those two next year, but we'll wait and see. What you have to bear in mind is that's an Odontoglossum species. Look at the number of new growths. So that's what's possible with some of the odonts. Once they get a good root system and they really take off, that's a species as well. So I forget what that one's called. Naivium, but I haven't had that one long, so no point in looking back on that. But that's a good bush Odontoglossum, and in theory those two can get to that stage one day. Okay, that's my two old-fashioned odonts. And another request. Somebody asked what my Sideria japonica was doing, and quite honestly at the time I didn't know, because this gets tucked away with Phalaenopsis and just ignored. I just water them now and again. But yeah, I mean, it looks like a nice plant. I feel very sorry for that leaf, but it had to be cut, and it's had cinnamon on the edge. And that's yeah, it's got some reasonable roots in there. Most would think that needs watering, whereas I don't. That top surface will just get a gentle spray because the colour of the bark in the bottom of the pot is dark. And that's the problem you can get, is when you've got your top half of your pot has got most of the roots in, and the bottom half's got some roots in, but it's still wet. So if I water that now, the bottom of the pot has not had chance to dry out. So any roots down in there are still soggy, and that's how the root rot sets in. So if it really doesn't look like it wants watering, then don't. You know, these roots can dry. They can stay dry for a while. And a little spray on those surface roots will keep that going probably another week. And by then, perhaps the bottom of the pot will have dried out. Anyway, let's go and have a look and see what that looked like in May. I haven't got a clue. So that's Sideria japonica back indoors with all the other phals. We have a mass of Phalaenopsis indoors. They're not all mine. Anything with the red tag's my daughter's. But we do have some spikes. There are some spikes lurking in there. Every now and again when I get round to watering them I have a quick look round, and there are a few spikes around. Not many, but some. Some will do for now. Anyway, that's that one. Well, I suppose we'd better do the giant Cattleya. I certainly don't want any more this size. This is a beast of a plant. It's huge. Trying to get it to stand up is hard work. I was really worried I was going to lose this earlier in the year, but it's pushed out a nice strong new growth. It's got a whopper of a sheath on it. It's absolutely huge. You know, but no sign of any buds in the base yet, so we'll have to wait and see. It's pushed some reasonable roots out from that new growth, so it is rescued. There's an eye on the side there that hopefully will push next time, maybe even two. We'll see how it goes. Right, we'll go back and see what sort of state that growth was in back in May. So, a tatty looking plant. There's several of those leaves were starting to yellow. They've long since gone. They have gone over basically. But the other leaves that were left didn't look too bad. That was a shame about that sheath on that growth, because that did actually have tiny little buds in it, and they just went brown and died. So they never actually, you know, got to mature, which is a shame, you know. But I've seen pictures of the bloom on this, and I am looking forward to the blooms. Let's just hope this latest sheath does it. But yeah, I mean, back in the day, the new growth that we're now looking at was just that, just a new growth with no roots coming out at all. So it's done well since then. So that's the larger Cattleyas all watered or sprayed. Some of them got sprayed. They didn't need watering. They're still damp. So yeah, they live up there, close to the glass as I can get them, nice and high up. So it's warm and bright. Just the job for Cattleyas. Okay, that's them done. So that's the end of the before and after set. I won't do any more for now. I'm getting bored with doing them, basically. I'm sure some of you are getting bored with watching them as well. But it's been an interesting exercise to go back and look at some of the plants, you know, in May. Next year I will probably do something similar, but instead of having a May update, I'll have probably a March update and just start much earlier in the season and not attempt to film every single plant, but just pick on some of each type of genus and see how we get on, but do a similar thing again next year, because I like the idea. And I just thought this is a view I very rarely take nowadays, the whole thing. Yeah, you know, it's not very often I scan round the whole grow room from basically indoors. That looks like trouble down there. Keep your head out of that bucket, mister. That's not for you to drink. Yeah, so, you know, just a quick scan round. You know, there's a few blooms. I love it when Vanda blooms fall off. They're huge. Yeah, so I mean, there's still a few things out in colour. Little dots of colour around, not masses of it, but, you know, there's a bit around. So, thanks for watching this little set. It's been enjoyable. And hopefully I'll do something similar again next year, but not attempt to do as much. The idea was good, and it's really enabled me to look back over everything I've got. The downside was, obviously I've got quite a few new plants in, and some plants are out under the hedge in orchid heaven. So it wasn't an exact science, it never was going to be that. But anyway, there we go. Thanks for dropping by, thanks for watching, and also big thanks for all the 1,000 subscribers, people who've added comments to that particular video. So I'll repeat it again here. If you want to go into the draw for the plant giveaway, you must say so in the comment section under that video, yeah, and specifically say that you want to go in the competition. Okay, otherwise I won't know. So only those that have specifically asked to be entered, or count me in, or words along those lines, they'll get put in the magic hat at the time. Probably, certainly not this weekend, but probably the following weekend I'll do that. So that'll have been like 2 weeks to give everybody a chance to get in there that wants to. Okay, once again, thanks for watching, and thanks for your support over this period. It's been great. See you next time.